Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Spilker. I'm the Voyager project scientist. You're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on Talk Radio 77, WABC.
Welcome once again to the Dr. Sky Experience, heard exclusively here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. As we like to call it, the crown jewel of radio, the iconic 77 Talk Radio, WABC beaming out of New York City, the nation, the world, and I'm even sure out into the cosmos. And if you're a first-time listener to this particular archive and our regular live programs on WABC, it's a privilege and honor to join with you, ladies and gentlemen, on the great subject of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our producer, Richard Dugan, Dr. D, who makes it all sound just as good as you would expect. And today, ladies and gentlemen, a great interview today, and we'll do a brief bio of our special guest, Dr. Linda Spilker. She's been involved with the Voyager spacecraft as a Voyager project scientist for quite a long time, and she'll be here in just a moment to discuss so much about what she does there on this most series of amazing spacecraft, Voyager 1 and 2. But a brief background of Dr. Linda Spilker. Her roles include scientific research on outer planet ring systems, as well as leadership and management roles on NASA and international planetary missions. Her research focuses primarily on planetary ring research, including stellar and radio occultation analyses of outer planet ring system. She returned to Voyager about 4 years ago and is currently the Voyager project scientist, as well as a JPL research fellow and senior research scientist. Dr. Spilker, it's an honor to have you on the Dr. Sky Experience. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Steve.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, your background is very deep, and I know the conversation we want to start off with is, of course, Voyager, but I got to go backwards. I mean, I'm fascinated as an observer of the heavens. You know, during my college days, I was fortunate to have as a professor, Dr. Tombaugh, as we all know, of the now changed planet from a major planet to a dwarf. But the observational time that I've spent, my fascination has always been with the Saturnian ring system. So talk a little bit about that, because this ring system is kind of an anomaly in the universe, or at least the solar system. I mean, we have other planets that have these thinner rings, but what's the majesty, in your opinion, of the Saturnian ring system? It's so fascinating.
Yeah, Saturn has very impressive rings, and I think the most beautiful rings in the solar system. They certainly contain the most material, the most extensive, and you can see them even with a small telescope. They're the rings of Saturn are made mostly of water ice particles, and these tiny particles do an intricate cosmic dance around the planet, and they actually interact with some of the moons as well at Saturn, and these moons create beautiful spiral waves, very similar to what you might think of as wrapping up a spiral galaxy very tightly, and lots of these waves in the rings as well.
Beautiful sight. And even in telescopes as small as 4 and 6 inches, we're talking about refractors and reflectors. You're so right. When Saturn comes to opposition, we get to see this magnificent ring. But without getting too technical, and I know you could get extremely technical on this, and we appreciate your expertise. For those out there that are looking at the ring system of Saturn, if I'm correct, it's starting to close in. And maybe in another couple of years, it's going to be something that you're going to have to wait a while, because it goes edge on. Isn't that correct in the next few years?
That's correct. That's correct. The rings of Saturn, as Saturn orbits around the sun, that angle changes, and you get to the edge-on view of the rings, and then you do have to wait a while for the rings to open back up again and for a chance to see them.
Well, hopefully nobody within the sound of our voice will miss the opportunity. You know, for children, people like ourselves and seniors in the senior community, it's always a showstopper. But Linda, I'm honored again to have you here to discuss the project that we're talking about here and the program, the Voyager series of both Voyager 1 and 2. Describe these spacecraft as far as the launch dates, because we go back to 1977. If I'm correct, Voyager 2 was launched before Voyager 1, but I guess Voyager 1 caught up with Voyager 2. Talk about the significance from your scientific side of this project so far, and what people really should know about the great science behind Voyager.
Yes, both Voyager spacecraft launched in September in 1977, and you're right, Steve, that Voyager 2 launched first on a slightly slower trajectory. 2 weeks later, Voyager 1 launched, and over the course of the next few months, actually passed Voyager 1 on the way to Jupiter. Over the course of the next few months, actually passed Voyager 2 on the way to Jupiter, and that was the first stop for both Voyager spacecraft for a flyby of Jupiter and a chance to see these amazing moons up close. And then on to Saturn, and at Saturn, Voyager 1 flew in close to Titan. That's Saturn's large moon, about the size of the planet Mercury, and that put Voyager 1 on a trajectory that took it up out of the ecliptic plane. Voyager 2, on the other hand, got a chance to fly by Saturn and then continue on for the only flybys we've had so far of Uranus and Neptune. And at that point, when the Voyagers were launched, at that point when the Voyagers were launched, the thinking was we'd have a 4-year mission, get Jupiter and Saturn, and if all goes well, onto Uranus and Neptune. And certainly that's what happened. And after Neptune, I remember reading in the paper that those 2 old Voyager spacecraft probably just had a few more years of life left, and that was about 12 years after launch. Here we are almost 47 years after launch, and both Voyager spacecraft are still going strong. They've crossed the heliopause, the boundary that the sun controls, and they're now out into interstellar space.
Well, it's so fascinating, Linda, because if you look at these spacecraft, and again, radio is the theater of the mind, but obviously people, I'm sure, can, obviously at their convenience, take an image or pull down an image of these Voyager spacecraft. But am I correct? I mean, obviously the technology of the day was great, but if we had the same technology, well, now if we had those into those spacecraft, I wonder just what we would be getting, if not maybe more, technology, of course, on board. But describe for the audience the spacecraft. I mean, it basically used what? Obviously, 70s technology, or maybe even what? Late 60s technology. And it's still doing a yeoman's job for so many years. I'm amazed that they're even still functioning. Talk about the lifetime of these particular spacecraft and why they continue to give us response from the distance of deep space.
Yeah, the lifetime of the 2 Voyager spacecraft have been incredible. And you're right. It's 70s technology. Think about it. The first human was walking on the moon in 1969, and we started building the 2 Voyager spacecraft in 1972, just 3 years later. And just to give you an example of some of the technology, we have an 8-track digital tape recorder on board each Voyager spacecraft. That's what we use to record a lot of the images, a lot of the pictures that we took of the planets and play those back. And on Voyager 1, that digital tape recorder still works. We record the plasma radio wave data onto the tape recorder and still play it back to Earth, so the tape's moving across the heads, recording and playing back just like it did for the flybys of the planets. And the memory, it's incredible to think just how small the memories are on each Voyager spacecraft. You have a little bit of memory in your key fob, what opens your car door. And Voyager has less memory than what you have in your key fob. And so they're just little tiny computer memories into which they put the programs that could control that, pointing back at the Earth to send back data, pointing the cameras in the planetary phase, and now just organizing, collecting all the information that we're sending back to the Earth.
Quite amazing. And if you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, as always, we're here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Who am I? Dr. Sky, the proud host of the Dr. Sky Experience and our regular programs. On the number 1 radio station in the nation, as we like to call it, the crown jewel of radio, the iconic 77 Talk Radio WABC. It's our honor today to speak with Dr. Linda Spilker. She's involved as a Voyager project scientist and has so much of a vast experience in other subject matters that relate to these topics about the solar system and the universe, including great expertise in outer planet ring systems. Doctor, it's so great to listen to the stories that you can share with us, but on a personal note, tell us the pride that you have in being part of this team, because this is not everybody you'd meet on the, walk down the street and get a cup of coffee and say, hi, what do you do? All of which everybody has a purpose. But describe your experience and what it means to you to be part of this great team in history of space exploration.
Yeah, I'm very proud to have been part of the Voyager mission. I was with Voyager for the first 12 years after launch, which was through all of the planetary flybys, then went off and worked on another mission called Cassini for about 3 decades, and then came back to Voyager. But Voyager is truly unique. If you think about it, all of the missions that have followed for the outer planets have really stood on the shoulders of Voyager in a certain sense. When you go back to Jupiter or go back to Saturn, you're taking the information gathered up by Voyager. And in so many ways, Voyager really changed our view of the outer planets and of our solar neighborhood. Those planets became worlds with details in their own right. Each of those tiny moons, many of which were just pinpoints of light in many of Earth's telescopes, now became worlds in their own right with all kinds of interesting detail and, finding things like volcanoes on Jupiter's moon Io or the bright icy surfaces on Europa at Jupiter and Enceladus at Saturn that pointed to ultimately oceans underneath their icy crust. Just so many new discoveries and just changing and expanding the way that we think about the planets in our solar system and in a certain sense about ourselves. So I'm just really happy to be a part of this incredible mission and to continue to be a part of it now that we're in a very unique realm, the only two spacecraft to ever have gotten into interstellar space and making direct in situ measurements of the fields and the particles and what this environment is like so far from the sun. Voyager 1 is about 160 astronomical units. That's using the Earth-Sun distance as a yardstick and still going strong. It takes 22 and a half hours at the speed of light for a signal to go from the Earth to Voyager 1, and that's almost a light day. It's just so amazing to think about all the incredible things these tiny spacecraft with 70s technology are doing even today.
Well, you say it so well, and obviously this is fascinating. Let's take the crow or bird, celestial bird view over the top of the solar system. Now, I'm correct on this. We'd like to get your expertise involved in this. Voyager 1 and 2 are actually heading in different directions, if I'm understood. That was on purpose, of course. I mean, 1 supposedly is 35 degrees north of the ecliptic, Voyager 1, and as you know, probably better, Voyager 2, 48 degrees south of the ecliptic. So is that a fair statement? I mean, that's what I read. That's what I'm reading, not reading right now. But what was the intent and purpose of sending them out into two different directions over time? Any value based on that?
Well, in the directions they ended up going in a certain way were just serendipitous because Voyager's initial mission was just to fly by the planets. And it was that geometry of those flybys that determined the direction that they would go. At Saturn, Voyager 1 came in very close to Saturn's moon Titan, and in the doing so and getting a great view of Titan, it bent its trajectory up out of the ecliptic plane, never really thinking ahead to where we might go into interstellar space. And for Voyager 2, we wanted to get a close look at Neptune's moon Triton. And to do that, we had to actually go up over the top of Neptune and kind of come back around, and that headed Voyager 2 to the south and getting us an incredible flyby of the moon Triton with its geysers going off as Voyager cameras took pictures of what was going on. So it really was just, it wasn't planned because the mission, as I said, the expectation was that the spacecraft, with that technology and given their age and where they were, they expected the missions to end there in the late 1980s or early 1990s.
Amazing stuff, Linda. Doctor, I'd like you to comment on this. People take for granted, I guess, that spacecraft just go out into destinations. Let's talk about the planetary phase of the Voyagers. I mean, in the simplest way that average people like ourselves can understand this, how do these spacecraft navigate in the solar system to get from here? It's like, say, shooting a bullet from New York to Los Angeles, and let's say the target was somewhere in LA from New York. How do they even figure a way to do that? Because space is so vast, and most of us obviously have no clue. So help us on that. That's amazing.
Oh, sure. First, I'll start out with, for the Voyager mission, the reason we actually started planning the mission and building the spacecraft in the early 70s was because of the unique alignment of the four outer planets with the opportunity with a single spacecraft to visit all four of the planets. And so what we do is we launch from the Earth, and then we can use something called optical navigation, look at the position of the stars, basically, much like the early people in their ships would do. And given the position of the stars, we knew where Voyager was, and we could make slight adjustments to its path or its trajectory. And then at each planet, carefully target the distance and the location of the flyby, and actually use the planet's gravity to pull us along like a slingshot and head us out toward the next destination. So Voyager 2 went from Jupiter, slingshot out to Saturn, slingshot out to Uranus, slingshot out to Neptune, and all along using basically the background stars and images taken in the systems themselves to keep us very closely on the path that we wanted. At this point in time, the Voyagers are so far away, we don't worry about where they're headed on a path, and we don't change their trajectories anymore. We just keep going further and further from the sun.
Doctor, one of the greatest interviews we've had, at least by the audience telling us so, is an interview we did last year with, I gather, if I say it correctly, I hope, one of the co-designers of the golden record that is on these particular spacecraft, the 12-inch, that has so much information and pictures and sounds and all kinds of data on there, with John Lombard. Talk a little bit about this, because I was amazed to know that the technology used in that was something way, way ahead of its time. And if you'd be so kind to describe what we're talking about these golden records, that's fascinating.
Yeah, the golden record, I kind of see it as a message in a bottle, that it's humanity's way of taking information about our planet and about ourselves out to the stars. And so the thinking was to put pictures, the sights of the Earth, music, sounds, hello in a lot of different languages. I'm sure covered well in your previous show. But to sort of encapsulate all of the information that we could and send it out to the stars. And then on the cover of the record, there's a picture of Voyager and a man and a woman next to it to give whoever finds the golden record an idea of how big we might be. And also using some of the neighboring pulsars, you can actually go back and find the location of the Earth as well. And there's a little diagram. We actually included a stylus to play the record and a diagram of here's how you do it. The record edge on, you put it here on the outer edge, and the first picture will be a circle. And it's really just amazing. And gold was selected because gold is very inert. It's a heavy metal. It's long-lived. And the thinking is that perhaps the golden record will last 1 billion years. And we've even charted out over the next 1 million years or so which stars each of the Voyager spacecraft may fly close to. And it's just a question of, they're going to be tiny and their power long gone. Could someone perhaps find one of the Voyagers and use the golden record to perhaps come back and find us here on Earth?
Well, a previous Star Trek movie, not to be a spoiler if people haven't seen it, I'm sure you know well about it, that the spacecraft, I'll just give the very short version without the spoiler, that apparently the Voyager craft, or one of them, I guess, goes out into deep space. And then we'll leave it to the rest of the imagination for people, of course, that want to see this. But it actually turns into something that's quite amazing in the sci-fi world. But who knows? That may very well be happening to a future iteration of the Voyagers, if we think along those same lines. Science fiction sometimes does a great justice to the things that we know in science, don't you think?
I absolutely agree. I really enjoyed that movie. And I was one of those people that the movie continued on and they kept saying Voyager, Voyager, Voyager. And it never dawned on me that it was Voyager. And then toward the end of the movie, where they come out and they look down and they see the Voyager spacecraft, it dawned on me that's Voyager. That's the spacecraft I'm working on. That's kind of my spacecraft. And I was completely amazed, and it made the movie that much better.
Well, if I was in the theater and I knew that, what you were doing, I would have said, definitely, here's a free pass to go to popcorn and get a large drink from the concession stand, just to know that here you are. How many people in that audience knew that? Of course, you didn't stand up and say, it's me, I did that. Obviously, that's a great tribute to you and the whole story of the Voyager.
A fun part of that story is I went with a group of friends who had seen the movie previously. I couldn't make it when they'd gone to see it. And it was, of course, a group of Voyager colleagues. And so they all knew what was happening. And so when it got to that point in the movie, they weren't watching the screen. They were watching me to see when it would dawn on me that it was the Voyager spacecraft.
Wow.
So anyway, it was a lot of fun. And no one said a word about what was coming. And I just, got to watch and enjoy and kind of have it revealed right there on the screen.
Hey, what an honor and what a surprise. But I want to talk in the few moments we have with you on something I think is very interesting. I've been reporting locally and nationally as all I'm getting is information. Of course, I should have called you first and appreciate your time again, and hopefully we'll talk more in the future. But what we're talking about here, as you know best, in November of 2023, the Voyager 1 is sending back ones and zeros, what we might call in generic terms bad data. And then, which is even more amazing, tell us the story of what might have happened, what was the cause. We talked about when it may have started. And I'm amazed about what you're probably going to tell us about how they kind of fix this without sending up a astronaut with a toolkit or a computer, service to call. Tell us the whole story about the bad data, what might have happened, and what was fixed and how.
Right. Yeah. Well, both of the Voyager spacecraft are getting old, almost 47 years old. And so every once in a while, we have what we call an anomaly. Something goes wrong and it's unexpected. And so one day, Voyager 1 is sending back those ones and zeros, which mean, are turned into science data and engineering data, and everything looked great. And then the next day, we get the pass from the Deep Space Network to send us the data that it's bringing back, and we notice, something is wrong. It's just sending a repetitive pattern of ones and zeros. It was kind of more like just a dial tone. It had gone from a conversation with Voyager to just a dial tone. And so we weren't getting any information. Imagine trying to fix your computer if you know it's broken, but your computer screen doesn't work. You can still type in the keyboard, but you can't see anything on the screen. And so we were then faced with... Worse
than the Blue Death screen, right. There you go.
Yeah. And so we were faced with, okay, let's try turning some things on and off. Maybe we can reboot, in a sense, the computer or something. So we did the easier things to do first, and those didn't seem to work. And then we thought, well, maybe it's in this engineering data mode. Let's try and use some of the others. There's 10 different data modes on Voyager, and see if we can get any information out of one of those data modes. We tried that, and we got some interesting results back from 2 of the data modes. And it turned out with a little bit of detective work and looking at old memos and really like an archaeological dig on past anomalies that had happened like in the 90s on Voyager. It was discovered that we were actually getting a readout of one of the memories, the flight data subsystem, which is the memory that collects the information from the spacecraft and the instruments, puts it into packets, and sends it back. And we had decided that was probably where the source of the problem. And when we got that readout of each location in the memory, we found that one of the chips had failed. It was a hardware failure, and that the bits were stuck in that piece of the memory. And so we knew where it was. We knew what subroutines were in that memory. It's a pretty key subroutines that were needed in order to get Voyager 1 up and running again. And so a very clever group of individuals, a Tiger team, actually took those subroutines, moved them to a different place in the memory to some data modes we weren't using anymore because we couldn't send data back at that high of a rate, moved them, and then we all got together waiting on a Saturday and waiting and wondering, is it going to work? And so sure enough, once the command was given, send back data, then everything worked again, and we started getting all of the information that we needed on the engineering side. So it looked like they'd found the fix for Voyager. And the next step over the next several weeks will be to try and then now fix the piece that contains the science modes and send the science mode up and fix it and then get the science data flowing again. And hopefully within a couple of weeks, we'll now have science data coming back as well as engineering data. But amazing story of
that's
no
amazing.
information to solving the problem.
Yeah. So no, I'm blown away by this. And, on a lighter note, if there was a Nobel Prize type prize for the repair person who did that, that should be headline news, because if I'm correct, it looked like 3% of something there, as I'm calling it a chip or whatever, may have been corrupted. But you're right. If you're looking at the blue screen of death on your computer and the whole system's not working or you can't see it at all, that is monumental. But now it goes to the next part of this that I've always had a hard time understanding, and thank God we have you to answer it. The spacecraft allegedly has some 23 watts of power that it's sending its signal, and if it's 22 and a half hours, is this assessment correct that by the time it reaches, let's say, Goldstone or one of the big giant dishes, that it has a billionth of a watt of power, which is like an attawatt? I mean, I'm reading that. Are they totally incorrect in the way they report this? Because that signal is so small, if I'm correct on this. How the heck does that spacecraft, how the heck did they even receive that signal which is almost impossible at distance. That's amazing.
Yeah, you're right. The signal from both of the Voyagers, I think of it more like a whisper from space, and that as you get further away, that whisper is getting fainter and fainter. And so in the planetary flyby days, we could take one of the big dishes, like you say, at Madrid or Goldstone, the 70 meters, and downlink the data that way. Now with Voyager, we're starting to have to combine different stations, different antennas at the station. And in fact, if we want to play back the tape recorder on Voyager 1, we have to actually take a 70 meter plus 4, and if we can get it 5 of the 34s, which is like everything the complex has, array them all together. Imagine making a super giant ear and listening for that signal from space coming back. And it's just, as you said, getting fainter and fainter as we move further and further from the sun. But we can still do it, and we think that into the 2030s, if nothing else goes wrong with the spacecraft or the hardware, we'll be able to continue sending back Voyager data until finally the power that we have available becomes too low to keep the spacecraft pointed at the Earth.
Well, just a couple of other quick comments, observations, or questions, whichever way you'd like to interpret them. I was reading about this, that there's a radioisotope power supply. It's like on that big boom that if you see in the mind's eye, the spacecraft, you know better. But that is what not just powers the spacecraft, it actually heats it up so that the electronics or the systems on board don't freeze. Is that a fair assessment? That's amazing.
Right. It's the decay of plutonium in that radioisotope thermoelectric generator that's turned into, that decay of plutonium is turned into heat, turned into electricity, basically, and that's used to power the spacecraft. And the power on the spacecraft, sometimes when it runs through certain components, those help keep the spacecraft warm. There's a few heaters in the spacecraft as well. The bulk of the electronics is inside the bus. Underneath that big white antenna is what we call the spacecraft bus, and that has the electronics that run the pointing for the spacecraft and that run the computers are basically contained in that. And then some of the instruments, though, are actually out on a boom. The magnetometer in particular is out on that very, very long boom, and so they don't have any additional heat. And one really wonderful story is with the instruments that are outside of the bus. We decided we don't have enough power to run their heaters, so we're going to turn off the heaters, and we'll see what happens. And the instruments cooled far below their operating temperatures. They'd never even tested them at the temperatures were so cold. But every single instrument kept working. In fact, the sensitivity, sometimes detectors like it cold. The detectors got colder, and so their sensitivity or their seal to noise actually got better.
Amazing. Totally incredible. One more question as time runs out. The clock rules here. And again, we appreciate your time here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Dr. Linda Spilker is joining us, talking about Voyager, her time in other areas of NASA exploration, planetary ring systems, outer planetary ring systems, to be more precise. But talk about what's exciting that you're working on and the promise for the future, because we have a lot of young folks that listen to this, and they come up to me all the time in our public programs and say, hey, Steve, Dr. Sky, what do I need to do to become an astronomer or space scientist? So instead of me answering it, let me have you have a shot at that.
So do you want me to answer what it takes to be a planetary scientist, or talk about Voyager?
Sure. Or just somebody who wants to get into the world of being an astronomer or space scientist. And we have a lot of young children, Doctor, that want to know an answer. I try to give it to them, but I'm not you, and I thought you'd be better equipped to give them some hope on this.
Oh, okay, yeah. For going into a job in planetary science and becoming a scientist, one of the things that's really important is start early, taking lots of math and science courses, and it's important to take a lot of math and science courses and use those then to find out what area fascinates you the most. For me, it was planetary rings, and I just really remember using my tiny telescope to look at Saturn's rings, and that sort of swept me up. When a chance came to do more with the ring data, then I took it. In the case of Voyager, just the thought of there are going to be future missions. One of the spin-offs from Voyager that's going to launch in October is Europa Clipper, and it's to go back to Jupiter's moon Europa and do a detailed study and try and understand more about that liquid water ocean underneath its icy crust. Another future mission is to go out back to Saturn's moon Titan, with a mission called Dragonfly, with a quadcopter that can actually fly in the atmosphere of Titan and land on the surface and make measurements and then pop up and move a little bit and land on the surface again. So there are really exciting future missions. And there's even one to go back to the planet Uranus with an orbiter, much like the Cassini orbiter, and that will carry a probe and to study that system in detail. So there's a lot of future missions ahead to still keep exploring the planets and the moons in our solar system.
Well, Doctor, you're excellent on these subjects, and I hope you'll agree, hopefully, that we can talk in the future when things change or the latest updates on this particular epic mission in science, the Voyager spacecraft. We'd love to talk again. And, one of the things that I've always had a hard time in school, I always remember professors telling us, and you know this better than anybody here in the conversation, the speed of light, 186,282 miles per second. And I scratched my head, and so many fellow students wouldn't say, what does that really mean? So on a lighter note, we did the calculation, of course, by reading it in a book. I didn't do it personally. And I tell people, hey, folks, the speed of light is 670 million miles an hour. And they look at me and say, how can that be? And I say, that's a fact. And Doctor, I know you know that that is a fact also as we conclude this exciting edition here of the Dr. Sky Experience. Many, many thanks, Doctor, for joining us. And like I said, thank you so much for being part of our discussion today and conversation in which we're discussing with you the great science that you've been involved with as a Voyager project scientist. So thank you, and please stay on the line with us as we go to the hard break at the bottom of the hour. That concludes this edition of the Dr. Sky Experience. We're on Talk Radio 77 WABC, the crown jewel of radio, as we like to say, beaming out of New York, around the nation, around the world, and I'm sure, Doctor, even out into the cosmos. If the Voyagers can do it, so can our radio station, and we're proud of it. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time.
It's been a privilege to be here.
Thank you, ma'am.